You have been trying. Not half-heartedly, not with the diluted effort of someone who does not really care, with the full weight of someone who cares completely and has been applying that care consistently and has been watching it produce nothing like what the caring was supposed to produce. You have tried harder. You have tried differently. You have tried being patient, and you have tried being more proactive, and you have tried letting go, and you have tried holding on, and somewhere in the middle of all the trying you arrived at tonight, which is another night of the same trying, producing the same result, which is nothing working. The exhaustion of this is specific. It is not the exhaustion of someone who has given up. It is the exhaustion of someone who has not given up and cannot figure out why that is not enough. Before we begin, leave one word in the comments tonight. One word for what the trying feels like from the inside. Stuck, pushing, grinding, forcing. Whatever is most honest, someone will read it and recognize it immediately. If this channel is finding you something worth returning to, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. Now, close your eyes if they are ready. Tonight's stories come from 6 traditions and 9 centuries. A Chinese calligrapher who spent 20 years perfecting a single character and understood, on the morning he finally stopped trying, why every perfect version he had produced was wrong. A Japanese carpenter of the Muromachi period who built beautiful houses for other people and could not build the thing he most wanted to build, and found the reason in a piece of wood that refused to be forced. A Tibetan monk who practiced the same meditation technique for 15 years without breakthrough and discovered, on the day his teacher told him to stop, what the practice had actually been for. A Korean laywoman who tried for 30 years to fix a relationship that did not want to be fixed and understood, when she finally stopped, what she had actually been trying to fix. A Sri Lankan farmer who fought his land for a decade and learned in a single conversation with an old neighbor something that a decade of effort had not taught him. And a very old Vietnamese monk who was asked, on the last day of his teaching life, what the most important thing he had learned was, and who said, without hesitation, that it was the difference between the effort that opens things and the effort that closes them. These stories are contemplative in nature, offered for rest and reflection, not as medical or therapeutic advice. Simply stories, simply this. Feel where your body meets whatever is beneath it right now. Feel the specific quality of hands that have been trying all day. Let them be open now, just for the length of a breath. The trying can pause for tonight. The stories are waiting. In the city of Hangzhou during the Southern Song Dynasty, in the late 12th century, when the refined culture of the Southern court had made Hangzhou one of the great centers of artistic production in the known world, and the practice of calligraphy had reached a level of technical sophistication that required decades of study to approach, there was a calligrapher named Zhao Ran, not the poet-monk of the grief story, but a different practitioner of the same name, a lay calligrapher who had dedicated his life to the mastery of a single character. The character was the one that means water. He had chosen it at 22, following a period of broad study during which he had worked with all the major scripts and had understood, with the clarity of someone who has surveyed a landscape and identified the one place in it that matters, that the character for water was the one in which everything he wanted to express was contained. Water was the character that, when written perfectly, conveyed not just the meaning of water, but the quality of water, its movement, its yielding, its persistence, the way it takes the shape of whatever contains it without losing its nature, the way it moves around obstacles rather than through them and arrives, eventually, at the sea. He had been writing this character for 20 years. He was 42 years old. He had written the character for water approximately 10,000 times. He had versions that his teachers had praised. He had versions that other calligraphers had asked to keep. He had versions that, by every technical standard the tradition offered, were perfect. None of them were right. He could not have explained what wrong meant in this context. The technical execution was correct. The proportions were correct. The brush pressure was correct. The speed and the ink density and the relationship between the strokes were all correct. And yet, every version he had produced, including the ones that had been praised and collected, had a quality he could only describe as trying. The character looked like someone had tried to write it. He understood this without being able to resolve it. The trying was visible in the perfection, which was a paradox he could not think his way out of, because thinking was itself a form of trying, and the trying was the problem. In the 21st year, his teacher, who was very old and had been watching the 20 years of effort with the patient attention of someone who knows exactly what a student is doing wrong and understands that telling them will not help, said to him one morning, "Stop writing the character for water." He looked at his teacher. "For how long?" His teacher said, "Until you forget that you are trying to write it perfectly." He stopped. Not easily. The practice of 20 years had organized his mornings around the writing. The absence of it was, for the first weeks, a specific kind of restlessness, the restlessness of a hand that has developed a habit and does not know what to do when the habit is removed. He sat in his studio in the mornings without writing. He looked at the inkstone and the brushes and the paper and did not use them. He walked in the garden. He read. He attended to the ordinary requirements of his household that the 20 years of concentrated practice had made secondary. After 3 months, one morning, without planning to, he picked up a brush and wrote the character for water. Once, without preparing, without setting up the right conditions or considering the stroke order or attending to the technical requirements he had been attending to for 20 years. He set the brush down and looked at what he had written. It was right, not perfect in the technical sense, though it was technically adequate. Right in the sense he had been unable to produce in 10,000 attempts. The character looked like water, not like a person trying to represent water, like water itself had briefly moved through the brush. He sat with it for a long time. He understood, sitting with it, what the 20 years had been for, and what they had not been for. They had not been for producing the character. They had been for preparing the hand and the attention so thoroughly that when the trying finally stopped, what remained was the capacity to simply do the thing without the interference of effort. The 20 years of trying had been necessary, and the trying had been what was wrong with everything he had produced in 20 years. Both of these things were true simultaneously. He went to his teacher and told him what had happened. His teacher listened. Then he said, "This is the teaching that cannot be given directly. The trying has to be exhausted before it can be set down. I could not tell you to stop trying 20 years ago. You had to try until the trying was finished." He paused. "The character you wrote this morning was written by the 20 years, not despite them, because of them. But the 20 years had to become invisible first. This is the first thing tonight's stories offer, not the instruction to stop trying, as though stopping were simple or available on demand. The recognition that the trying you have been doing may be doing its work even when it produces nothing visible. That exhaustion is sometimes the last stage before something shifts. That the 20 years may be the preparation for the morning when the trying finally rests. Your trying has been real. The effort has been real. The years of it have been real. And they may be building something that only becomes visible when the effort finally stops interfering with what it has been building. Let the hands open now, just for this breath. The character does not need to be written tonight. The 20 years are in the hands already. And as Zhao Ran sits with the one right character in the morning light of his Hangzhou studio after 20 years of wrong ones, We travel now eastward to Japan, where a carpenter found in a piece of wood that refused to be forced the lesson he could not find in a decade of effort. In the province of Yamato in central Japan, in the middle years of the Muromachi period, in the 15th century, when the architectural traditions of Japanese domestic construction were developing the forms that would define the aesthetic of Japanese interiors for the following 5 centuries, there was a carpenter named Muso Joshin, not the nun of the garden story, but a craftsman who had taken the same name in homage to a teacher he admired, a master carpenter who had spent his working life building the houses of others. He was 51 years old. He had been building since he was 16. He had built houses for merchants and houses for minor nobles and houses for monasteries, and one very large house for a regional governor that had taken 3 years and was considered among the finest domestic structures in that part of the province. He had built beautiful houses for other people for 35 years. What he wanted to build was a single small room. Not a house, a room. The specific kind of room that the Japanese aesthetic of that period was beginning to develop. A room organized around simplicity and proportion and the specific quality of light that entered through paper screens. A room in which nothing was excessive and nothing was absent, and the proportions were such that a person entering it experienced something they could not immediately name, but that had to do with a sense of rightness. He had been trying to build this room for 10 years, not continuously, between commissions in the time between one large project and the next. He had built and dismantled 6 versions of the room. He had tried different proportions and different materials and different relationships between the screens and the alcove and the floor. He had consulted with other craftsmen and with a monk who had studied the aesthetic principles behind such rooms. None of the 6 versions was the room. They were all technically correct. They were all, by every objective measure, good rooms. But none of them had the quality he was trying to produce, the quality that he had experienced in 1 or 2 rooms he had entered during his working life, and that had made him understand that a room could be built in which the rightness was simply present, not created by any particular element, but by the relationship between all the elements. In the 10th year of trying, he was working on the 7th version of the room. He had obtained a piece of hinoki cypress for the main pillar of the alcove, a straight-grained piece of exceptional quality, and he was preparing it for its place in the structure. The wood would not plane smoothly. This was unusual. Hinoki of that quality planed easily. He checked the blade. He adjusted the angle. He tried again. The wood produced a surface that was technically smooth but had a quality he could only describe as resistant. The surface looked right, but felt wrong under the hand. He put the plane down and looked at the wood for a long time. He had been forcing the room into existence for 10 years. Every version had been built through the application of his considerable skill and knowledge and intention, applied directly to the problem of producing the quality he wanted to produce. The wood under his hand had the same quality as the 6 rooms he had dismantled. Technically correct, missing the thing. He left the workshop and went for a long walk, not to think about the room, simply because the workshop no longer felt like the right place to be. He walked through the area around his house, which was a semi-rural district where the town gave way to fields and then to the lower slopes of the hills. He walked without purpose and without the particular quality of attention he brought to his work, which was focused and intentional and directed. At some point, he stopped and looked at a stand of trees on the hillside. Cypress trees, as it happened, though not of the quality used for fine carpentry. Ordinary trees, in the ordinary arrangement that trees take when they are growing in their own way rather than being cultivated. They were simply there, each one complete in itself. The space between them part of what they were, nothing arranged, nothing forced. The rightness of it, not produced by any intention, but simply present in the things being what they were. He stood and looked at the trees for a long time. He went back to the workshop. He picked up the plane. He worked with the wood in a different way than he had been working, not forcing the surface into the quality he wanted. Attending to what the wood was and letting the tool follow the grain rather than imposing a direction on it. The surface came smooth and right under the plane. He built the 7th version of the room differently than he had built the 6 before it. Not with less skill, with less intention. He built it the way the trees grew on the hillside, each element being what it was. The relationships emerging from the nature of the elements rather than being imposed on them. It was the room. He could not explain exactly what he had done differently. The technical execution was similar to the previous versions. Something in the quality of attention was different. The forcing had stopped. He said to his apprentice, who asked what had changed, "I stopped building the room I wanted to build and built the room the materials wanted to be." They are not always the same room. When they are not the same room, you always build the wrong one no matter how hard you try. Whatever you have been trying to force into the shape you want it to be, there may be a shape it wants to be that is not the same shape. The effort to impose your shape on it may be exactly what is preventing it from becoming what it is capable of being. This is not an instruction to stop caring about the outcome. The carpenter cared deeply about the room. It is the recognition that caring and forcing are not the same thing, and that the best outcomes often come when care is present and force is absent. Let the breath be what it is right now, not the breath you are trying to produce, just the breath that is here. Let it be its own shape. And as the hinoki cypress takes its natural surface under the carpenter's plane in the Yamato workshop, and the 7th room begins to become what it wanted to be, we travel now westward across the sea to Tibet, where a monk practiced the same technique for 15 years without breakthrough and found, on the day he was told to stop, what the practice had actually been for. In the Kagyu monastery of Surfu in the region of U in central Tibet, in the late 13th century, during the period when the Kagyu lineage was developing the particular forms of practice that would define its transmission for the following centuries, there was a monk named Chokyi Gyaltsen, not the master of the earlier story, but a practitioner of the same name, a monk who had entered the monastery at 18 and had been assigned, in his early years, to a specific meditation technique by his teacher. The technique involved the visualization of a particular image, held in the mind with specific qualities of clarity and stability, for increasingly long periods. It was a foundational practice of the tradition, designed to develop the specific quality of concentrated attention that more advanced practices required. He was 33 years old. He had been practicing this technique for 15 years. He sat with it every morning for 4 hours and every evening for 2. He had maintained this schedule without interruption, through illness, through the disruptions of the monastery's administrative life, through periods of doubt and periods of apparent progress. He had not broken through. The technique was working in the sense that his concentration had improved substantially. His teacher acknowledged this. Other monks noted the quality of his attention. By every observable measure, the practice was producing what practices of its type were supposed to produce. But the specific experience the technique was designed to develop, the quality that his teacher and the teachers before his teacher had described as the destination of this particular path, that experience had not arrived. He went to his teacher in the 15th year and said, with the specific quality of honesty that 15 years of genuine effort produces, that he did not know what he was doing wrong. His teacher looked at him for a while. Then he said something unexpected. He said, "Stop the practice." The monk did not immediately understand. His teacher said, You have been practicing correctly for 15 years. The technique has given you everything it can give. Stop." He asked, "For how long?" His teacher said, "Until you understand what the practice was for." He stopped the practice. He continued the monastery's communal schedule, the meals and the ceremonies and the work periods. But the 4 morning hours and the 2 evening hours that had organized his life for 15 years were empty. The emptiness was uncomfortable in a specific way. He had understood himself for 15 years as someone practicing toward something. Without the practice, he was someone who had arrived somewhere without knowing where he had arrived. He sat with the emptiness for several weeks. One morning, sitting in the communal meditation hall during a period that was formally scheduled but that he was no longer filling with his technique, he noticed something he had not noticed before. The quality he had been practicing toward was present. Not dramatically, not as an arrival, simply present, the way the morning light was present in the hall, not produced by anyone's effort, but simply there as the condition of the space. He sat with it for a long time. He understood, sitting with it, what his teacher had meant by asking him to understand what the practice was for. The practice had not been for producing the quality. The practice had been for removing the things that were obscuring the quality, which had been present all along. The 15 years of technique had been doing something he had not understood it to be doing. It had not been building something new, it had been clearing something old, and it had finished clearing it, which was why his teacher had told him to stop. The work was done, the quality was there. The continuing to practice was now actively interfering with the noticing of what the practice had uncovered. He went to his teacher and told him what he had found. His teacher nodded. He said, "The effort was necessary. Without it, the clearing would not have happened. But the effort cannot also be the finding. These are 2 different movements. You have been trying to practice your way to something that is only found when the practicing stops." He paused. "You have been trying so hard for 15 years. That is exactly what was needed. And now the trying can rest. There is something you have been trying your way toward for a very long time. The trying has been necessary. It has been doing something even when it appeared to be producing nothing. But there may be a point at which the trying itself has become the thing standing between you and what the trying was for. Tonight is a night when the trying can rest. Not because the effort is wasted, because it has done its work, and what it was clearing is now clear, and the clearing can only be seen when the effort is quiet. Let the eyes be completely closed now, completely still. Let the effort of the day be finished. It has done what it can do. What it has cleared is here, in this quiet, available now that the clearing has stopped." And as Choki Gyaltsen sits in the communal hall, with the quality he had been practicing toward finally visible in the morning light, we travel northward to Korea, where a woman tried for 30 years to fix a relationship that did not want to be fixed. In the province of Jeolla, in the southern part of the Korean peninsula, in the early years of the Joseon period, in the late 14th century, there was a woman named Ba Tam, not the Vietnamese grandmother, but a Korean laywoman who had been given the same informal title of address, a practitioner of the Pure Land tradition who had been trying to repair a relationship with her sister for 30 years. She was 54 years old. Her sister was 51. They had been close in childhood, the closeness of sisters who share a room and a world, and the specific knowledge of each other that proximity produces in the young. The distance had begun in their 20s, over something that the specifics of time had made unclear, but that the quality of the distance had kept alive. She had been trying to repair it for 30 years. She had written letters and had received letters that were polite but distant. She had made visits and had been received with the warmth that courtesy requires, and without the warmth that closeness used to feel like. She had done the specific things that one does to repair a relationship, apologized for what she understood to be her part in the original distance, acknowledged the hurt, expressed willingness to move forward. The relationship had not repaired. Not because her sister was cruel or unwilling. She did not believe that. Her sister was a good person who had been hurt and who had, across 30 years, built a life around the absence of closeness with her older sister, in the way that people build lives around the things that have become fixed in them. The 30 years of trying had been genuine. The effort had been genuine. And the result of 30 years of genuine effort had been 30 years of the same polite distance, which was beginning to feel like the trying itself was producing the distance, a quality in the encounters that had the specific character of encounters organized around an agenda. She went to the monastery one afternoon, not for a teaching, simply to sit. She had been sitting with this for 30 years and had not yet understood it. A nun she knew slightly, an older woman who had been at the monastery for many decades, sat beside her after a while and asked, with the directness of someone who has watched many people sit with unresolved things, what she was carrying. She told her about the 30 years. The nun listened without interrupting. When she was finished, the nun asked a single question. She asked, "What are you trying to fix?" She said, "My relationship with my sister." The nun was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you certain? Because what I hear is someone who has been trying very hard to fix something for 30 years. And in my experience, when effort that consistent produces nothing visible, it is usually because the thing being worked on is not the thing we think we are working on." She sat with this for a long time. She did not immediately understand. She thought about it across several visits and several conversations and several mornings of sitting. At some point, she understood. She had not been trying to fix the relationship with her sister. She had been trying to fix the feeling that the distance from her sister produced in her, which was a feeling that had more to do with her own sense of having failed, her own inability to tolerate the thought that someone who had known her completely had chosen distance, than it had to do with the relationship itself. The relationship was the sister's to have or not have. The feeling was hers. She had been spending 30 years trying to repair someone else's interior in order to resolve something in her own. This could not be done. Not because her sister was unwilling, but because the interior of another person is not accessible to the effort of a third party. She stopped trying to fix the relationship. She began, instead, to sit with the feeling the distance produced in her and to work with that directly, which was work she could actually do because it was in her own interior. The relationship with her sister did not immediately change. It changed over time, slowly, as Ba Tam's relationship to her own feeling about it changed. The quality of her visits changed when she was no longer arriving with the agenda of repair. The letters changed when they were no longer organized around producing a particular response. Her sister noticed. Not all at once, gradually. She said, in a letter some years later, that her older sister felt different to be around, like someone who was simply visiting rather than working on something. The closeness did not fully return. 30 years of distance had built a life on both sides. But the quality of the distance changed. It became the ordinary distance of two people who have grown differently, rather than the charged distance of an unresolved thing. Whatever you have been trying to fix for a long time, there may be a question worth sitting with tonight. Are you certain it is what you think it is? The effort that has been producing nothing may be aimed at something that is not yours to fix. And underneath that thing, there may be something that is yours, that has been waiting for the effort to turn in the right direction. Let the trying rest for this breath. Let the question simply be present, not answered, just here. And as Ba Tam writes a letter to her sister, that is not organized around repair, we travel now southward to Sri Lanka, where a farmer fought his land for a decade and learned in one conversation what a decade of effort had not taught. In the district of Anuradhapura in the north-central region of Sri Lanka, in the early centuries of the Common Era, when the great irrigation civilization of the ancient Sinhalese kingdoms was at the height of its technical achievement, and the relationship between the farmer and the land was organized around systems of water management that had been developed over generations of careful observation, there was a farmer named Mahinda who had been fighting his land for 10 years. Not literally fighting, applying force, attempting to make the land produce what he wanted it to produce through the consistent application of effort and technique and the specific determination of someone who had been told by his father and his father's teachers that a farmer who worked hard enough would be rewarded by his land. He was 38 years old. He had taken over his father's fields at 28 and had been applying maximum effort to them for a decade. The yields were adequate. They were not what they should have been, not what the neighboring fields produced, not what the effort he was applying should, by any reasonable calculation, have produced. He had tried different planting times. He had tried different seed varieties. He had tried different irrigation patterns. He had consulted with the officials responsible for the irrigation system and had followed their recommendations. He had worked longer hours than any farmer in his district. The fields produced adequately and not more. His neighbor was an old man who had been farming the adjacent fields for 50 years. The old man's fields produced abundantly. This was visible and had been visible for 10 years, and was a fact that Mahinda had been trying, through the application of harder work and better technique, to replicate. One evening, the old man came and sat on the low wall at the edge of Mahinda's field and watched him work for a while. Then he said, in the manner of old men who have waited a long time before speaking, "You are very tired." Mahinda said, "I work hard." The old man said, "Yes, I have watched you work hard for 10 years. I worked that hard once, when I was young and did not yet know my land." Mahinda set down his tools and looked at him. The old man said, "Your land is not mine. It does not want the same things mine wants. The water moves differently here. The soil holds differently. The same technique that works in my field damages yours, because my field is not your field." He pointed at a specific area of Mahinda's lower field. "That corner has been wet for 10 years, he said. "You have been irrigating it the same as the rest, but it holds water differently. It does not need what the rest needs. It needs less. You have been giving it the same effort you give everything else, and the effort has been the problem." Mahinda looked at the corner. He had looked at that corner 10,000 times. He had not seen what the old man was pointing at, because he had been looking at it through what he knew rather than through what it was. The old man said, "Your land has been telling you this for 10 years. You have been too busy trying to make it into a different land to hear what it was saying." He stood and prepared to leave. Then he said one more thing. He said, "Effort is necessary. I am not telling you to stop working. I am telling you to work with what is here rather than against what you wish were here. The land knows what it is. The farmer's job is to listen to what it knows." Mahinda changed the irrigation pattern in the lower corner. The following season, the yield from that section was the best it had been in 10 years. Not from additional effort, from less effort applied more accurately, based on attending to what was actually there rather than imposing what he believed should be there. There is land you have been fighting, not literally. A situation, a person, a circumstance that you have been trying to make into something other than what it is, through the consistent application of effort. The effort may have been the problem, not because effort is wrong, because the effort was aimed at changing what was there rather than attending to what was there. What is actually here? Not what should be here, not what you have been trying to make it into. What is it, as it is? That is the question the land has been asking for 10 years. Let the body be completely still now, just for one breath, not working toward anything, just here, in the field as it actually is, in the dark as it actually is, in this moment as it actually is. And as the old neighbor walks home through the paddy fields in the evening light, and Mahinda looks at his land for the first time without the frame of what he needs it to be, we come now to the last story, to Vietnam, and to an old monk who was asked what the most important thing he had learned was. In a monastery in the hills above Hue in central Vietnam, in the early years of the 20th century, when the Tibetan Buddhist tradition of Vietnam was navigating the particular difficulties of a period in which the external world was changing in ways that made the interior world both more necessary and more difficult to maintain, there was a monk named Thich Quang Nguyen who was, at the time of this story, 87 years old, and had been a practicing monk for 68 of those years. He was, by any measure the tradition offered, someone who had understood something, not in the way of a famous teacher whose reputation drew students from distant provinces, in the quieter way of someone who had lived long enough and practiced consistently enough that the understanding had settled into the posture and the quality of attention and the specific way he moved through the monastery's daily life. On the last day of his formal teaching, a young monk who had been his student for 3 years asked him the question that young students ask old teachers on last days. He asked, "What is the most important thing you have learned?" The old monk sat with the question for a while. He said, "The difference between the effort that opens and the effort that closes." The young monk waited for elaboration. The old monk said, "When I was young, I tried very hard. I tried the way you try when you believe that trying harder is always the answer. The effort of someone who does not yet trust the process and so compensates with force." He paused. "This kind of effort closes things. It closes the attention. It closes the receptivity. It closes the specific quality of openness that is required for the deepest understanding to arrive. You cannot force your way to understanding. You can only prepare the conditions in which understanding becomes possible, and then you have to stop forcing long enough for it to arrive." The young monk asked, "How do you know which kind of effort you are using?" The old monk thought about this carefully. He said, "The effort that opens feels like attending. You are present to what is here and responding to it. The effort that closes feels like forcing. You are present to what you want to be here and trying to produce it." He paused. The calligrapher who tries to write the perfect character is forcing. The calligrapher who attends to the brush and the ink and the paper and lets the character emerge is attending. The result looks similar from the outside. From the inside, they are completely different movements. The young monk asked, "How do you move from one to the other?" The old monk said, "Usually through exhaustion. You try so hard for so long that the trying finally becomes impossible to maintain, and in the gap between the trying and the next attempt, something arrives that the trying had been preventing." He looked at the young monk. "I am telling you this not so that you can avoid the exhaustion. You cannot. The exhaustion is necessary. It is the exhaustion that finally convinces the trying to stop. I am telling you so that when the exhaustion arrives, you recognize it as a doorway rather than a failure." He paused one last time. "You have been trying so hard," he said. "I can see it. That is good. It is necessary. And at some point, probably not tonight, and possibly not for a long time, the trying will exhaust itself. And in that moment, do not reach for more trying. Sit still, What you have been trying toward will arrive in the stillness that the exhausted trying finally makes possible. He stopped teaching that day. He died the following week, in his sleep, quietly, in the way of someone who had made peace with every effort he had ever made and every result it had and had not produced. The young monk carried the teaching for the rest of his life. He said, in his own last years, that he had thought he understood it when he first heard it and had not. That he had understood it gradually, each time the trying exhausted itself and something arrived in the gap. He said, the old monk was right. The exhaustion is the doorway. Every time I thought I had failed, I had actually arrived at the doorway. I just did not know how to stop reaching for more trying long enough to walk through it. Tonight, the trying is exhausted. You arrived here because the trying brought you here. The calligrapher's 10,000 characters, the carpenter's 7 rooms, the monk's 15 years of technique, the woman's 30 years of letters, the farmer's decade of irrigating the wrong corner. All of it has been necessary. All of it has been doing something. And all of it has been leading to a gap like this one. A night when the trying is finally too tired to continue. This is the doorway, not the failure, the doorway. Step through it by doing nothing. By letting the body be heavy and held, and the breath be the breath, and the dark be the dark. Whatever the trying has been clearing is on the other side of this stillness. You have tried so hard. The trying can rest now. We have traveled far tonight, to the Hangzhou studio, where a calligrapher wrote the character for water correctly for the first time in 20 years, on the morning he stopped trying to write it perfectly. To the Yamato workshop, where a carpenter found the room he had been trying to build for 10 years by attending to the wood rather than forcing it. To the Tsurfu monastery, where a monk discovered on the day his teacher told him to stop practicing what the 15 years of practice had actually been for. To the Heolia province, where a woman understood that 30 years of trying to fix a relationship had been aimed at the wrong thing. To the paddy fields of Anuradhapura, where a farmer learned in one conversation what a decade of effort had not taught him. And to the hills above Hue, where a very old monk named the difference between the effort that opens and the effort that closes, and said that the exhaustion was not the failure but the doorway. 6 traditions, 9 centuries, 6 different arrivals at the same understanding. The trying has been necessary. Every year of it, every attempt, every version that did not work. The effort has been doing something even when it appeared to be producing nothing. It has been clearing. It has been preparing. It has been exhausting itself so that what it was trying toward can finally arrive in the stillness that only exhausted trying makes possible. You have been trying so hard. That is the truth of this night. And the trying has brought you here, to this dark, to this stillness, to this specific exhaustion that is not failure, but the last stage before the gap. Let the names dissolve now. Jiaoran, Muso Joshin, Choki Gyaltsen, Ba Tam, Mahinda, Tich Quang Nian. What remains is what has always been here, waiting for the trying to rest long enough to be noticed. The breath, arriving without your effort. The body, held without your management. The specific quality of this quiet at this hour, which requires nothing from you, and which is, if you allow it, exactly what it needs to be. You have been trying so hard. The trying can stop now, just for tonight, just for the length of this breath, and the next one, and the one after that. What the trying has been clearing is here, in the gap, in the stillness, in the dark. If sleep is reaching for you, let it come. The doorway is open. You do not have to push it. Good night. The effort has done its work. Before you go, something small. I made this channel for nights like this one, when the trying has run out and the exhaustion is complete, and something is needed that is not more effort. If tonight gave you one breath of permission to stop trying, I am genuinely glad. Leave one word in the comments if you feel like it. One word for what the trying has felt like. Someone will read it and recognize it. And if the quiet Dharma is somewhere you want to return, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. It just means the next time a night like this one comes, this will be waiting. Good night. The effort has done its work.